Well, hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. This is TAM Lab number 100, and this is monitoring a Cassandra Database Cluster with vROps and vRealize Log Insight with Fluentd. And presenting this today is Nico. He's one of our senior TAMs. So with that, Nico, I will pass it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Bill. So yeah, thanks for the intro. This is an idea that came out of a take two that I did with the cloud management BU marketing team. Cassandra is a distributed database. It actually is the back end of a lot of our products like Log Insight. And we kind of came up with this series of blogs, which we can link later, that I wrote up. And also I have an offline demo on how to, make vROps and Log Insight better together to monitor something like, a Cassandra. You can do a Hadoop, but something that's NoSQL. Any of these kind of new modern applications that are coming out that are open source that a lot of companies are kind of using to replace their legacy products. So, we have a collector, a log collector for Log Insight. It's, the Log Insight collector agent. It's pretty flexible if you want to use it for Linux or Windows. If you want to collect some standard logs, you can scrape files, you can collect system logs, var log, you can do all that stuff. But there's also an open source log collector called Fluentd. I think it's one of the more popular log aggregators and data collectors out there. So, it'll aggregate logs from basically anything that anyone wants to write a plugin for. Hadoop, regular syslog, Amazon, Apache, Cassandra, MongoDB, Kubernetes. It's a big one, obviously. So a lot of this was born out of the fact that they needed a flexible solution to collect Kubernetes log data, from all the worker nodes and all the containers and things like that. So Fluentd kind of came out of that. It's a very simple install. If you're on Linux, it's just a package you grab out of an archive. If you're on Windows, it's just an MSI file. And it's just a basic install that installs an agent. And then the good folks at VMware have created a Fluentd plugin for Log Insight. So if you install this plugin into your Fluentd agent, which runs on an operating system, like a Linux or a Windows, you can parse logs into a Log Insight friendly format and have those shipped off to Log Insight for ingestion. So there's instructions on how to install it. It's a gem file, so it uses Ruby. And then it even gives you a configuration file if you want to pull container logs, like for Kubernetes or something like that, from an operating system, and then also how to match everything properly and send it to your Log Insight host for ingestion. So it could be a little, there's very few instructions as far as troubleshooting. So I did have to kind of do a lot of trial and error to get it working. But if you can see here, I have a Linux machine. It's just an Ubuntu machine with Cassandra running on it. And we can see I have the configuration file for Fluentd, and I am collecting. So I had to come up with a lot of this myself. There's a lot of just basic stuff, but here we go. So you can see here where I have source. I started collecting. Linux makes it pretty easy because most stuff goes into var log. So you can see here my path var log Cassandra, and I collect every log file that's in the Cassandra folder or the Cassandra directory. I exclude the debug log because that's just a lot of stuff you don't want to see. And I have it read from the top of the file. I have it give it a tag called Cassandra. So then the tag, when you go into Log Insight, will be Cassandra.file path. So I'll just grab everything from that directory. And then, here is the actual Log Insight information. We go to the host. My Log Insight host is 192.168.124 on the port, the path for the API. And then I don't have any kind of SSL on because it's just a lab, so I don't have that on. So this is, it's only 20 lines. It's pretty simple. All you have to do is tell it what to read, how to read it as either a JSON, as a straight text, stuff like that. If you're very good with regex and you're very good with JSON, you could make this look a lot more fancy and just exclude everything you want and have all of the information come in a certain way. So you don't have to massage it within Log Insight. But my regex, even though I'm a Linux guy, my regex is pretty terrible. So I kind of just handle it all in Log Insight. But if you're good at that, any log you pull in from Hadoop, from Oracle, from Apache, from anything that there's a plugin for Fluentd, you just pull it in. You can massage it all in this configuration file and change it the way you want it to be, and just ship it off to Log Insight. And you can also ship it off, obviously, if you have a Splunk server, if you have another third-party logging server, you just keep adding new sections in this config file. So you can split one off to Log Insight for your VMware team or for your application team. You can split another log off to your Splunk team to do security. You can split another log off to another application team's logging infrastructure so they can do theirs. And so you can set it to multiple locations.
Would that be like by way of a new store?
So as far as like
defining another target.
So yeah, you define another target, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah. So you basically say match everything star, and then the store would be the type, and then you could send everything there, or you can match it only on certain parameters, with regex and stuff like that. So
very cool.
It can get pretty powerful. So once you have this configured and pulling in, we can go to our Log Insight. So if I just add a simple filter, if I could spell. So our source, it's our Cassandra database machine. So if we do a search, you can see here, this tag says cassandra.var Cassandra. So we're pulling in from that host now, all of the Cassandra logs. So anything with this tag that I specified in the config file, Cassandra.file path, it comes from that log file. And you can add many more of these tags if you want to specify it before it even comes into Log Insight. Or like I'm going to show you now, you can actually create new tags and extracted fields in Log Insight if you want to do it that way. So we have all these, application logs for the Cassandra database. So now that we have them, what can we do with them? So a big thing with databases.
Actually, quick question. From Log Insight's perspective, is there anything that you need to do in order to open that up, like configurations to allow your Cassandra virtual machine to submit logs, or is it ready and just accepting anybody that can send a log over to it?
Yeah, it's ready accepting over the API. You just have to make sure your physical firewall ports allow it, since it goes over a port. Yeah, so it's pretty simple from the Log Insight perspective. There's not much I had to do. So yeah, with databases, one of your biggest concerns obviously is when they go down. So with a Cassandra cluster, if one database goes down, the rest are going to pick up the slack. So it's not a huge issue. Still want to figure out why the database crashed. So if we just do we look for a shutdown. So a few minutes ago, I shut down one of the local nodes on the Cassandra database. See here, it says state jump to shutdown. So this is an important event. It's something that we don't want to miss. If somebody's shutting down our databases, that's kind of a big deal. We want to be alerted on. Now, alerting in Log Insight's not the most powerful thing. It's not really an alerting tool. It's an event root analysis and event management tool. So, we can always extract this field and monitor and give us an email, but that's, you really don't want to do that nowadays. Nowadays, we want to use it like vROps. We want to send something to vROps. We want to send it to ServiceNow. We want something to be actionable. So if this shuts down, it gets a ticket cut to a proper team and all that stuff. The days of kind of just getting an email that might be lost away are kind of fleeting. So let's take one of these events and we can, extract the field from it, create a dashboard, and then maybe even send it to vROps. So we'll do extracted fields now. So extracting a field is basically a regex where you want to find the important keywords in between two words in the event that you can alert on. So right here, state jump to shutdown. That's a pretty important set of keywords that I want to see whenever Cassandra database shuts down, not just this local one, but any Cassandra database running on any node. So I want to take that field, I want to extract it. You see here on the side that it's looking for the pre and post context. Actually, I think we want to get the space before. Yep. So basically, whenever we get this state jump to shutdown in the event, we want to make it its own extracted field. We'll call it Cass DB status. So it's basically a regex that's looking for, what's in between this space and after the shutdown. So if we save it now we have our own extracted field, kind of a tag that we can look for if we ever want to do anything with this.
So then on that, by defining that extracted tag, when Log Insight sees a message that fits that parameter that you just defined there, it's going to add that to that list of tags or at the bottom there, right?
Correct. It's going to get ingested first. Then Log Insight's going to see that regex that I specified, and it's going to tag it with that tag.
Got it. So then I guess the next step is, if we were using Log Insight for something else, would we see CassDB status for, vCenter records or things like that show up in here?
You would not. If you did a regular query for a vCenter, this CassDB status would not show up because there's no matching regex.
Yep, got it. Real quick, one more thing in the Q&A. Does the Fluentd, does that provide capabilities that the native agent from Log Insight does not?
It provides more robust. It all is based on JSON. So basically anything you can do with JSON, any way of massaging the data, you can do in Fluentd. Whereas the Log Insight agent is a little more of a proprietary config file that we have, where you have to specify, look in this directory for this file and scrape it, and then grab all this information. With the Fluentd collector, as long as you can manipulate in JSON, you can break out words, you can break out phrases, you can break out all kinds of different regexes, and you can customize it to your heart's content. So it is much more flexible than the standard Log Insight agent offers. The only difference is obviously the Log Insight agent will let you interface with our content packs in the marketplace for Log Insight because they're built on that Log Insight agent. Whereas the Fluentd agent, if it's collecting, the content packs have no idea about it. So it's gonna, it's not gonna leverage the same amount of capability with our content packs. But if you're willing to write your own content packs with Fluentd, you can get that same kind of power and flexibility.
Cool.
But it's gonna require a lot more work on your end.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So now that we have this, CassDB status exists, we can just, if we want to, we can make a quick widget. Nice line graph. And then if we go back to then we log in because we see our Cassandra database went down. And we can be like, oh boy, it went down a few times. So it went down, at 16 over here and then went down again. So it's been going down somewhat regularly. It's not just a one-time fluke. So maybe we have to go into vROps and figure out what's going on with the hardware or what's going on with the virtual machine. So once we have this, we could do our day-to-day feeding. We could click on one of these. And we get back to this. And now you want to create an alert, because having a dashboard, a widget, it's fine, but you have to log in manually and look to see what happened. So if we create an alert, we can say Cassandra Database. We want to send it to vROps. It's going to be immediate. Fallback object is just another machine that it gets sent to if vROps isn't available. I'm just going to choose vROps again. And then we want on any match. So we can save that. Cool. So now we have an alert. Cassandra Database Shutdown is enabled. Now, obviously, Log Insight will send the event immediately, but vROps takes a few minutes to process that event. So let's restart the database really quick. Cool. All right, so while that's processing, we can go into vROps. So I doubt we have the alert already. Oh, we do. Awesome. So, so you can see here, Cassandra Database down alert came in. So now we can action on it in vROps based on what came in. So we can look at the details, related alerts. So what's cool about this is we can look at the related OS that it came from, the ESXi host. So if there's major storage issues, latency issues, that might be taking down your databases. If there's issues on the Linux OS due to memory contention or swap space being eaten up and your database crashed, we can do troubleshooting there. And vROps 8 has this great workbench, troubleshooting workbench, where you can go in and see the status of all the objects connected to that alert. So it looks like the VMFS data store might have blipped. At that time, the ESX host might have had an extra data network transmit. So we can look at these anomalous metrics and do some troubleshooting to see what's going on. So this is only, this is great, but this is only part of the steps we could use. So, we go in, we see there's an alert, we check it out. We're like, oh, this kind of looks normal. What we can do now is, with the help of our application monitoring in vROps, we have something called the application monitoring agent, the Telegraf agent, that comes in newer versions of vROps from, I think, 7.x and on, where we could monitor Linux and Windows OSs. Now we can go one step further and monitor certain applications. So we have a list of standard applications that the Telegraf agent can monitor, and Cassandra was one of them. But obviously we can also do Tomcat, Nginx, Apache, a lot of the big ones. So Cassandra's already here. So, we have a Cassandra service being monitored. So all we have to do is install a Telegraf agent on each of the virtual machines that are running the Cassandra database. Once that Telegraf agent is pushed out via vRealize operations, we just have to configure a remote check. So I have my test cluster. The URL is the URL of the metrics that come from the Cassandra database, and I'll show you how to get these metrics. And then the install path of the actual Cassandra database, which is an US or Espen Cassandra. All of these settings are from so when it says localhost, it's not vROps as the local host. That's the local host of the machine that the agent is installed on. So don't let that confuse you. Localhost is 192.168.1.160, where we pulled the logs from and where Cassandra is running. It is not vROps. So you might be asking, what is localhost 8778? How do I configure that? So Cassandra has a Java plugin called Jolokia that somebody wrote. It will take a bunch of metrics and give them to you in a JSON request. And then once you have that JSON request, a third-party application can massage that data and show you the statistics of your Cassandra database. So you just have to simply follow the directions to install, I think for Wavefront. Yeah, Wavefront and vROps use the same exact Telegraf agent for the most part. So we have a Cassandra setup for our Wavefront that's already here. So all you have to do is curl and grab the jar file and install it in your Etsy default Cassandra config. And once you install that and restart Cassandra, you can go to localhost 8778/ I think it's read, and you'll get a bunch of metrics in a JSON format, just a big chunk of metrics. It's not even worth showing you because it's just a bunch of numbers that now another process can grab and it can give you metrics for. So vROps will go to that API. It'll look in localhost 8778. It'll say, I have a bunch of data here that I know how to read. It'll pull it in, and then it can put it into graphs for you. So now that we have this Cassandra agent configured, it's collecting. You can see by the check mark. The agent is also running and configured. So all we have to do now is go to our Cassandra instance. What did I call it? Cass. All right, now you can see here, not only do we have the virtual machine, the host, the vCenter server, and the vSphere world, we've got the Linux OS, since the Telegraf agent is collecting from the Linux OS, and we have the Cassandra instance that it's looking at. So if we're doing our troubleshooting and we see that there's something wrong here, immediate, that's our Cassandra database down, we can come in and we can say, virtual machine capacity looks fine, time remaining looks fine, let's go see what's going on in the OS. Okay, so metrics, no alerts, metrics, we can say that, let's check the CPU on the Linux machine, because what vCenter shows you for CPU consumption is always different than what the OS shows you. They're totally different metrics. vCenter has CPU available, CPU used, CPU, all these committed, in which the OS is going to show, or the Linux OS is going to show you what it sees and what it's using. So that's always a little more valuable to troubleshoot. So we've got all these great stats on CPU usage, time active, disk IO, memory swap, and all that stuff. You can see if your swap has been completely drained. And then, if you want to do your troubleshooting on the Linux machine and you say my Linux OS looks fine, I don't see any issues, then now, because we installed that Cassandra plugin into vROps, we can look directly at Cassandra now. And we can say the database is up now, but if it was down, you could say that we have an alert saying it's down. We can click on metrics. And if you're a database person, these might make more sense to you, but we've got client requests. You can see how many client requests came in. You can check the commit log to see if there's any tasks that might have crashed it, heap memory usage. These are all Cassandra specific metrics. They don't have anything to do with vROps. vROps would not know about these if they weren't configured. We can check the storage it's using. We could check the tables to see if the tables, have grown an extra amount, or what kind of tables are in the database. And then, we can troubleshoot from here. We can build alerts based off of these metrics. So if you want to work with your Cassandra DBA and say, what's important? What do you want to see from vROps? You can work with them to create alerts that either go to, ServiceNow, or alerts that go to their email or another third-party database monitoring product. So, Log Insight's powerful on its own. vROps is powerful on its own, but to get them to work together, it goes into a whole nother level of, I guess, what you would call single pane of glass monitoring, because we can monitor. And then, if you had Cisco UCS, if you had HP blades, if you had Dell blades, you can install the content packs for those vendors into vROps, and then you can go in and see, hey, my Cisco UCS blade crashed. That's why the database crashed. Or my Cisco switch went down. That's why we had a burp in the networking, and then the database went down because there was a timeout. So, right from this related object screen on the left, you can do a lot of good troubleshooting to see what's going on, all the way down from the hardware, all the way up to the actual software, whether that's Cassandra or anything else.
Quick question. So we have the Cassandra plugin, like you have even just highlighted there. Does that require the Telegraf agent to work, or is that Telegraf agent just giving us a more holistic view of what's also on the OS, the guest OS?
So the Telegraf agent is giving us that greater view of what's on the OS, and it's collecting the Cassandra info. So
got it. Okay, so without Telegraf, we couldn't run that Cassandra script as well, or the configuration. Okay.
Without Telegraf, your visibility stops here with the virtual machine.
Got it.
So you could do some troubleshooting and say my VM has high CPU load, has high contention, but that might not be enough.
So then, from the perspective of, maybe an operations team that spends more time in vROps, right? So you configured Fluentd to send the log to Log Insight, and then you've configured Log Insight to send that as an alert to vROps. How would somebody from here see, like, oh, it looks like somebody restarted, right? Somebody went and did a restart of that database, of that instance.
So, well, the Cassandra database down alert would be your evidence that somebody restarted the database. And then from there, if you want more details, you would go back into Log Insight. Okay. Log Insight's collecting everything. Yep. So we can see from there. And then there's more to be configured. When you if somebody actually shut down the database and it didn't crash, it's going to keep a log of who did it. Yeah. So, we can massage our JSON back in the Fluentd config file to grab that information. And we can do all that stuff.
That state jump to shutdown, is that specific to Cassandra? That specific phrase there?
I honestly don't know that. I know that there is when I was going through, I looked for, I did basic troubleshooting terms like shutdown, terms like crash, terms like down, and this is the most generic one I could find. So it looks like it's a generic Java message, but I think it's specific to Cassandra because I haven't found anything else that's got that. Sure. But, I'm not a Cassandra database administrator. If you actually sit down with a Cassandra guy and he's like, this is the message you have to look for, that's going to show all the time when Cassandra shut down, that probably would be what you would look for. But in my case, just, kind of working on this at a 100 level, this was the best bit of event information that I could find to give us the state of that Cassandra shutdown.
Got it. Fair enough. Thank you.
No problem. So yeah, you would look for, if you're an operations guy trying to do all this by yourself, that's one thing. But if you've got a team of database administrators and a team of other administrators that can help you along and say, yeah, Cassandra does this when it crashes, or Cassandra does this when it shuts down, it's going to do it every single time. That's probably what you would look for. It might be state jump to shutdown. I don't know that, but that's what jumped out at me. So that's what I alerted on. And like I said, you can pull using Fluentd, you can pull JSON from, as long as it's in a log file, it doesn't matter. And everything is logged. That's the number one area of truth for any application is the logging. So as long as the logging in somewhere logs who did it, what happened, and when it happened, we can send that all the way to vROps for alerting and alert off that. So yeah, that's kind of the entirety of that. Does anyone have any questions on how I got here, or anything I didn't cover, or anything that, if you want to go into the weeds with something?
Quick question in the Q&A. So can you skip Fluentd to Log Insight and go straight from Fluentd to vROps if you don't have or don't use Log Insight?
No, because vROps does not ingest logs, as far as I know. So the only way vROps will ingest a log is via the Log Insight to vROps configuration that you would configure here. So if this is not configured, there is no other way. I don't think vROps does SNMP or syslog ingestion.
Got it.
So this vROps integration, where you would integrate vROps here, then you go into vROps and integrate Log Insight with it. And then you can do metric calculation, launch in context. And the biggest one, which we did, was alert integration.
Got it. Okay. And
unfortunately, there's no way to skip Log Insight now.
Could you take a quick look back at the logs where you defined state jump to shutdown?
Sure.
So, you set up the alert that passed it to vROps, and vROps was able to map it to a specific host, right, or a specific guest VM.
Correct.
But you didn't specify that, as I recall, right? Like in any kind of mapping, or did you? Like, I'm just curious, how does vROps know that it belonged to that VM?
Gotcha. Whoops. Here we go. So, yeah, I think that as far as, so it understands it came from this VM because if you look at the source, 192.168.160, and then the VMware object ID, which I believe is the VM ID, and then it maps the VM ID to the VM. And then there's a separate vROps ID right here. So this is the vROps ID for.
Perfect. Okay, so then if it was like maybe more of a, let's say, a physical server that doesn't have a presence in vCenter or vROps or anything like that, it might show up slightly different. But because it was able to kind of enumerate some of that logic in there, it was able to map it through. Perfect.
Correct. Yeah. If you're going to use a physical server, it might go off just the base IP address in the source.
Yeah.
Or you might be able to tell Fluentd, pick up the host name when you send the information, and then you can send that as a separate tag.
And then another question just popped up in Q&A here. Can you summarize the steps in order to get the alerts in vROps? Specifically, I don't know where the open source Cassandra plugin that gathers events comes into play.
Okay. So the open source Cassandra plugin, we're talking about this guy, right? Yeah. This plugin, all it does is expose Cassandra metric information via an API. So an API on the local Cassandra host. So with this installed and running as a Java process, you can go to HTTP localhost port number, and then there's an API path afterward that I can't remember. And if you navigate to that, you'll get a ton of data, basically all the data that we saw all the data that we saw here comes from that API call from the Cassandra database machine running that Cassandra Jolokia plugin. So this data, it just comes into vROps via a collection from that Telegraf agent, the vROps Telegraf agent. The Telegraf agent puts it into metrics for us, just like you would see for a virtual machine, just like you would see for a host or anything like that. And then all of these are, and then all of these are, put into a readable format from that API call. Is
Okay,
that what the question was?
I'm sorry, the Telegraf agent. What's the sequence or the order that gets installed?
Okay, good question. So once you have vROps installed, it's called an ARC collector. It's a separate appliance that it gets installed alongside vROps. So to have a working Telegraf agent install, you have to have that secondary virtual machine. Then once you have that secondary virtual machine, that's why. It will connect to vROps, and then it'll show you a list of all your virtual machines. So Helger, you can see right here, these are all the virtual machines I have running in my vCenter. But I only have an agent running on one of them. So all I have to do to install that Telegraf agent is to click on one of my VMs. So I have a Win 2019 VM, agent's not installed. There's just a button right here. You install the agent. You can either have, you can do a bulk install using a common username and password if all your virtual machines have the same username and password, which I hope they don't. Or you can enter credentials separately. And then for Windows, you can install it via this template. Or for Linux, it'll actually push out the Telegraf agent, install it. You'll see here where it says agent status installing. When it's done, it'll say agent running and start success. And that's all you have to do to get the agent installed. And once the agent is installed, then we can manage the services. You can see here I have an Ubuntu machine it's found MySQL and it found Nginx. It's not actually collecting anything. And then the Cassandra one, I think that's a little old. I shouldn't say failed, but for the Cassandra one, you could see it discovered Cassandra because I configured this remote Cassandra check. So this remote Cassandra check will be here automatically because it detects Cassandra is installed once you install the Telegraf agent. And then you can go configure, give it the display name, the URL of this jar file to get the metrics that we installed, and then the install path of the Cassandra database. And then it goes out, it looks for all that. If it doesn't detect it right, you get an X. So you have to do some troubleshooting on that URL path. But once you get that, it starts collecting, and then you're done. The Telegraf database is collecting the data from that open source Cassandra plugin, and we have the Telegraf plugin collecting both for Cassandra and for the Linux OS, which requires no additional configuration.
Okay,
does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes.
No problem. Yeah, so I did write a lot of this. I have in a blog. Yep, so we have a 2-part blog that I wrote. It literally goes over all of this. If you have any customers who are interested, they can go through this. The first one shows you how to install the Fluentd agent and configure your alerts and log insight. And then the second one shows you how to configure the monitoring of Cassandra in vROps, like we just did. So everything we did, the database shutdown, the alert that goes to vROps, and then the configuration of the Cassandra Telegraf agent information along with the service. So everything we just did, it's in one-stop shop. Any other questions?
Well, we do have a message in chat, not a question, but just saying, I think this is great, and I have some playing to do with Fluentd, and I'd have to echo that. I mean, what we walk through here with with Cassandra is fantastic, but even the same principle applies to other plugins, right? And so, we could take the same logic and really expand out, that relationship between Log Insight and vROps and get a ton of additional, visibility and flexibility out of this thing. So
exactly.
Seeing Cassandra is wonderful, but just thinking about, again, where else we can take this is great.
Yeah, if you have a customer who's going to be getting big into containers and Kubernetes, this is the de facto event collection plugin for Kubernetes. So your customer will be using Fluentd. I can almost guarantee you that. There are a few other alternatives. There was another one, I forgot what it was called, but Fluentd is basically the standard for collecting Kubernetes logs. So if we weren't going to create that plugin, we're going to get left behind. So now that we have integration into Fluentd, now that your customer is deploying this for their container plugins, for their Kubernetes plugins, now we can send it to Log Insight. You could say, hey, customer, not only are your virtual machine logs, or your ESX logs, your vROps logs, your VRA logs all going to Log Insight, you can send your container logs to Log Insight now, and then we can do root cause analysis top to bottom based on everything, and not just our little ecosystem of ESX host all the way to VVM, because that's only part of the picture. So now if you have an entire single pane of glass all the way from the hardware to ESX, to the virtual machine, to the container orchestration, to the containers, to everything else, that makes vROps that much more valuable to the customer, makes Log Insight that much more valuable to the customer, and it makes troubleshooting that much more easy, since you don't have to open up 100 different tools and look at 100 different places to do basic troubleshooting.
Well, gosh, Nico, thank you so much. Thank you for putting out the effort for the blogs and then showing us this here during the session today. Again, it's the art of the possible, right? And this is just kind of opening the door to a ton of other options. So fantastic. Thank you so much. And everybody else, thank you for joining today. And I guess, we'll see you at the next TAM Lab.
Thank you, everyone.